Welcome. In this sewing tutorial, I'm going to be sewing with you, ensuring we all get there in the end and make this butterfly blouse. In your downloaded files, you will find all the information you need in order for you to make this beautiful butterfly blouse. This pattern is beginner to advanced friendly, making it a great opportunity for you to learn new skills. If you're new to sewing, I've included some steps that will simplify the process along the way. On your paper pattern, you have the option to make style A with a center front seam and contrasting fabrics, or style B, which is cut on the fold. I recommend using style B if you are a beginner, just because the mirroring method for style A can be quite confusing. Both of these styles give you the option to have it full length or cropped. In your butterfly blouse pack, you will find your tools and material checklist on page 3. Have a scan through and make sure you have everything. For my fabric, I'm using some thrifted cotton and some linen, which I bought off Marketplace. Here's some other types of fabric you can use. Once downloaded, open the PDF pattern file. Click your correct size. When printing, make sure it's single-sided. Ensure you have set your scale to 100%. This step is crucial to maintain the pattern's correct dimensions. Once it's printed, use the test square on page 1 to make sure it's in the right measurement. Lay your pattern pages down and join them together. This is how I do it. I fold along the border's edge on one side, place it to the next corresponding side, and tape it down. This technique creates some bulk paper in the corners, so use extra tape if needed. Here's what it should look like. Once you know what style blouse you want to make, whether it be style A or B, simply follow the guidelines provided on your paper pattern. For style B's, front and back pattern piece, you want to cut along the dotted line. Remember, both of these styles give the option to have your blouse cropped or full length. Cut off that extra length if it's not needed. You should have 3 pattern pieces: front, back, and sleeve. Sharpen your tools and iron your fabric. We are now up to step 5, placing your paper pattern on your fabric. For style B, front and back, you want to fold the fabric in on itself, giving you 2 fold lines, here and here. Your selvages should be meeting in the middle. For your sleeves contrasting fabric, it's selvage to selvage and you are cutting out 1 pair. If you find a better way to lay your fabric and pattern pieces down, by all means do so. This is just a guide. Whatever you are doing, make sure you place them accordingly to the pattern instructions. For style A, you are going to want to start your contrasting or main fabric right side up. Lay your front and back paper pattern pieces down. For your sleeve, you need to flip it over so the blank side is facing up. You will notice there isn't anything on this side, meaning you will need to add in your grain line yourself. To do this, fold along the existing grain line and draw a straight line on that crease. Lay your sleeve down flat. Check your grain lines. The grain line is the long arrow on your pattern pieces. This helps you place the pattern in the right direction of your fabric. To check it's aligned correctly, measure the bottom of the grain line to the edge of the fabric with your ruler, and then do the same for the top of the grain line. Do these measurements the same distance. Secure your pattern down. To cut out the other half of your blouse for style A, you need to mirror what you have already cut out. An easy way to do this so you don't get confused is to place your already cut pieces and pattern on your main fabric with right sides facing up. Then flip over the paper pattern piece. Now, this is what you're going to be pinning down. Remember to draw in your grain line as you did before on your sleeve, but to your front and back. Mark or pin them in place and cut them out. When you have everything cut out, snip your notches, which are the arrows. I like to snip mine about 3 millimeters in. You can draw these in if you prefer. When these notches aren't nipped, it can be quite frustrating for the sewer, which will be you in a couple of minutes, so take a look over everything, making sure it's all correct. Measure your bicep to figure out your bicep circumference. You want to cut your elastic shorter than that measurement. For me, I don't like it too tight, so I only take off 1 centimeter, but it's up to you if you want it tighter. Always test the elastic fit before sewing. To do this, you want to get your safety pin, pin it in place. I used a pin and then put the safety pin in. Here's me trying it on. Perfect fit. Put your elastic somewhere safe. We will attach this into our hem sleeve later. Bias binding is a fabric strip cut diagonally across the fabric, making it stretchy and perfect for finishing edges, especially curves. You also have the option to purchase pre-made binding. Follow your instruction booklet for more information on what bias binding to purchase. I prefer to make my own, so keep watching and I'm going to show you how. Fold your fabric on the bias grain, which is at a 45-degree angle from the salvages. Do this by grabbing one corner of your fabric. This creates a triangle. If you have a right-angled ruler, you can check you have it sitting correctly by lining up the straight salvage edge with the grain line, like so. Pat or iron down that crease so it stays flat. We are now going to get our bias width measurement, which is 38 millimeters, and mark it parallel to that fold crease. We know it's on the fold, so we need to halve that measurement for our first line. Once we have that line, keep marking in the width and drawing your lines. Refer to your bias binding chart for how much you need. If you ended up with a smaller scrap piece like mine, it's just the same process, but instead of cutting it on the fold, you cut it right sides facing up. Remember, there is a detailed illustration for you to follow in the instruction booklet and links below to help you, just in case you get confused. Cut along these lines and create these strips. If you have a royalty cutter and a mat, it will be much quicker. Next, you want to cut the ends. You can either eyeball it or draw a straight line, fold it over, press that crease, and cut that excess off. And there you have your 45-degree angle. Place one strip over the other, right sides facing at a 90-degree angle. Here, you want to make an L shape, or imagine it's a bottom of a square. You're going to be sewing down like this. It's always handy to put a pin in there and check before going off and sewing the real thing. Yep, that looks good. To join all the strips, back tacking at each end. Trim some of that bulk off without trimming the stitch line, then press the seams apart and give it a good press. Continue to do this with all the other joins. You should have one long strip. We are now going to create our fold creases on our bias binding. The first method I'm going to be showing you is with your bias binding maker. This one here is 18 millimeters. You can purchase these tools at your local haberdashery or online. You can also create these creases without this tool. It will just take a little longer and you have to be mindful of your fingers when ironing. Alright, grab your maker with wrong side of your bias strip lying up. Feed one end of your strip through the wide end of your maker. You can use a pin or stiletto to help feed it through. Then pull your maker and with your iron follow the side it comes out to set in the folds. Once you have finished the whole strip, fold your bias binding in half again to create another crease. This is called double folded bias binding. If you didn't have a maker, you want to do this manually by folding the fabric in half, then back on itself. Be careful of your fingers. Now you're ready to attach your binding. Woohoo! Yay! Sew a straight stitch around the neckline and back keyhole, 6 mils from the raw edge. Sewing center front seam. With right sides together, go ahead and sew your center front seam. Then overlock or zigzag stitch the raw edge. Press your seam to one side and pin stitch that seam down. Pin stitching is a decorative sewing technique and adds a professional look. Make sure you place the needle as close as you can to the seam and sew straight down. Join shoulder seams with right sides together and overlock using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now you are going to attach your bias binding onto your back keyhole cutout first. Place your back fabric wrong sides facing up. Take your bias binding and position it with the right side facing down on the fabric. Pin it in place and double check you have the right side of the bias binding on the wrong side of the back fabric. Sew the binding using 1 centimeter seam allowance. Go slowly around the curves to avoid pulling which can cause puckering or bunching. Use your fabric scissors to trim the seam allowance down by 3 mils. Be careful not to cut into your stitching. Now snip in the ditch, which is a term meaning to make 2 or 3 small snips in the curve. This will help the binding to lay flat when it's turned over. Flip the bias binding over to the right side of the fabric and sew down close to the edge for a neat finish. Repeat on the other side of the back keyhole cutout, mirroring these steps. Go ahead and snip those little tails off. With your tape measure 37 centimeters and put a pin or mark that point. To attach your neckline binding, start at the marked point and pin the right side of your bias tape on the wrong side of the neckline. Follow the same steps as before to attach it. Remember to sew slowly. Before we go ahead and close our neckline down, we need to close the edges of both of our tails. For this, just turn the edges over 1 centimeter and sew them down. Then you're going to stitch that bias binding closed, like you did before. But we are going to start from the end of our tail. Go as slow as you need here. Wow, look at us go! With right sides together, sew your side seams and overlock the raw edge. Do the same for the center back seam, cutting off that tail so you have a straight edge to overlock. Next you want to pin stitch close to the edge of the seam like you did on the front. Before we create our gathers with 2 rows of stitching, we need to close our sleeve with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. While your sleeve is lying flat, make sure you have all your notches in place. They indicate where your gathers should begin and end. Change your stitch length to the longest length on your sewing machine and pull about 10 centimeters of thread tail. Starting at your first notch, sew a straight stitch 6 mils from the raw edge all the way to the other side, ending at the end notch. Don't backtack. When you're finished, pinch the thread and pull, leaving a thread tail. Repeat this same process underneath that stitch, approximately 1.6 centimeters from the raw edge. Get your other sleeve and follow the same steps to create 2 rows of stitching. To create our gathers, hold the bobbin threads. These should be the threads on the back side of your fabric and gently pull them at the same time with the same tension to gather the fabric. Keep pulling and adjusting the gathers evenly between the notches. This gives you a smooth, puffed effect. Be careful not to pull too tight. If one of the threads breaks, you will have to redo the stitch line. Once you have a nice amount of gathers, align your sleeve notches onto your armhole notches. Grab your right side of your sleeve and your right side of your armhole. Insert the sleeve into the armhole. Pin the underarm seam junctions together. Then match the front notches, back notches, and shoulder notches. Now you can see if your sleeve is gathered too much or too little. Adjust by pulling the gathering threads, which are the same threads you were using before, to add more fullness. Or massage those gathers out to decrease your fullness. Pin everything in securely and repeat the same steps on the other side. Set your stitch length back to normal. Sew your underarm in place first. Start from the first notch. Make sure your underarm junctions are aligned. When you are at the start of your gathers, sew all around where you pinned. Go slowly over those gathered sections to keep the fabric even. Adjust the gathers with your fingers or stiletto as you sew to avoid puckering. Once the sleeve is attached, use your overlocker or zigzag stitch to stop that raw edge from fraying. Inspect your gathering to make sure it all looks even and pull out that second gathering thread. We don't need it anymore. If you want to use your quick unpicker, go ahead, but it should come out pretty easily with a couple of pulls. Now create your casting for your sleeve elastic. You are going to fold that raw edge of your sleeve hem by 1.5 centimeters twice, leaving a 2 to 3 centimeter gap to feed the elastic through. This creates a neat double fold. You can press this down with the iron if you want to hold it in place. Sew the bottom inner folded edge, leaving a 2 to 3 centimeter gap unsewn. Go ahead and stitch all the way around. Get your pre-cut elastic and your safety pin, and safety pin your elastic. This is what it should look like. Start to feed your elastic through one end of your casing. When it's a little way through, put a safety pin on the other end. This acts as a stopper. Keep feeding that elastic all the way over to the other side. Once it's all the way around, grab both ends, making sure you don't twist your elastic when you do this. Put a pin through these ends so they stay in place. Pull out your elastic so you have more to work with, and overlap the ends by about 1.5 centimeters and sew them together securely down, either with a zigzag or straight stitch. If you are using a straight stitch, do some crazy stitching so they won't ever come apart. Tuck the elastic fully into the casing and sew the gap closed with a straight stitch. Gently stretch the sleeve hem to distribute the elastic evenly. Now you're going to stitch directly into that seam. This stitch blends into the seam and makes it invisible from the outside. It also will stop your elastic from rolling. Okay, we're nearly done. Lastly, we are going to hem our shirts. Feel free to try on your blouse and see if it's the right length for you. This is the final call if you want to shorten your blouse. For our hem, we are doing a 1 centimeter on 1 centimeter turn on turn. Do this all the way around, starting from the side seam junction. When you're finished, give your blouse a good press with your iron. This sets the stitches in and makes those seams crisp. Wow, look at what we've made. You should be really proud of yourself. Thank you so much for following along and purchasing your pattern. I really hope you've learned something, and I hope you have a great rest of your sewing journey. Oh wow! I love my blouse, and hopefully you do too. Thank you so much. See you everybody. Bye! I hope the process was enjoyable for you and that you're thrilled with your finished piece. I'd absolutely love to see your creations. Tag me. I'll link my Instagram and email below. If you have any questions, need clarification, or have feedback, please feel free to reach out. Your input means the world to me and helps me improve for future patterns. Happy sewing! I can't wait to see what you create.